Part 2. Smoke me a kipper. I'll be back for breakfast. Billy Joe Epstein knew he was a coward. And what's more, he knew everyone else knew it too. He gave it off, stank of it somehow, emanated it, like the stench from a weak dead skunk. And on this Saturday night, he sat hunched over his usual bar space, on his usual bar stool over his usual drink, emanating away, and trying to get drunk enough to help him forget he was a coward, which, as usual, was not going to work. Billy Joe, call sign the Jewish cowboy, was 19 years old, and he knew just about all there was to know about piloting state-of-the-art Space Corps craft. He sailed through the written tests, breezed through the oral exams, excelled at the theory, and in 2 days' time he was going to get thrown out of the Corps. The day after tomorrow, he was going to take and fail his final Space Corps examination flight for the third, and therefore last, time. Because, when it came to the dangerous stuff, the low-level passes over the high-gravity rock deserts of Miranda, Billy Joe Epstein would at the last moment lose his nerve and veer away. Because, as they said behind his back in the locker room, Billy Joe just didn't have the love spuds. He looked into his shot glass and saw his own cowardly reflection staring at him contemptuously in the treacle-coloured liquor, so he drained it and looked up to order another one. She didn't see him, of course. She never seemed to be looking in his direction, even if he was the only one in the bar, which was not uncommon. But that was fine by Billy Joe, because it gave him more chance to be looking at her. Her name was Mamie, not that Billy Joe had ever plucked up the courage to call her by her name. She was, well, better than him. She could have her pick of the jocks who jostled the bar to have the honour of flirting with her, and she wouldn't even give them the time of day. She was special. Her hair, well, you wouldn't say it was brunette, and you couldn't say she was a redhead either. In between, kind of, depending on the light. And her eyes weren't blue, and they weren't green, but you get the idea. And Billy Joe didn't converse with her at all, except to order his drinks and keep his manners with please and thank you. Anything else would have been just inconceivable. The thought, even, when it had the temerity to creep into his mind, of actually asking her out on a date, made him feel like someone was twisting his stomach back at both ends with a high-tension torque wrench. While he was waiting for her to notice he wanted serving, Billy Joe felt a tap on his left shoulder. He turned to stare into a gleaming row of medals. "I believe you're in my seat, Sonny." Billy Joe looked around. There was no one else in the barroom. There were 9 empty stools, count them, 9 ranked along the bar. Mamie was looking over now. He felt his ears begin to glow. He glanced at the jock's armband. A commander. "Sure," Billy Joe shrugged. "Sorry." He slipped over to the adjacent seat as manfully as he could. "What stinking luck," the commander grinned. "That one's mine as well." Billy Joe was smiling, not out of bravado, but because his face didn't know what else to do with itself. Was this officer trying to pick a fight? Mamie stepped over and asked Billy Joe, "What'll it be?" "I was here first, old love," the commander smiled pleasantly. "No, you weren't," Mamie returned the smile. The commander's hand shot out rattlesnake fast and grabbed Mamie's wrist. "Let's not have any back-chat, old love," his smile remaining even and calm. Mamie didn't make a sound, but Billy Joe could see she was hurting. He cleared his throat. "I think you've probably had a couple too many drinks, sir." He tried to make it sound as uncontentious as possible. "Maybe you probably should think about possibly not manhandling the lady that way, you reckon?" The officer's smile broadened. He dropped Mamie's wrist. "You feel possibly perhaps you're maybe man enough to stop me, you reckon?" he parodied. Sir? Billy Joe stuttered. "Oh, let's forget about rank here, laddie." The officer slipped off his jacket, its medals clanking musically as he laid it carefully on the bar stool. "Let's forget I'm your superior officer. Let's forget me gold bars, my medals, and my unarmed combat training officer badge. And let's just do it." Billy Joe's face was still wearing the same smile it came in with, and his ears felt like they were about to burst into flames as he watched the officer calmly rolling up his shirt sleeves. There really is no need." It was only a one-syllable word, but Billy Joe started it perpendicularly and ended it horizontally. Eat! He had no idea where the blow had hit him, but his whole face hurt. He looked up. The officer was already rolling his sleeves back down, as if that one blow would be enough to put Billy Joe Epstein down and keep him there. Something about that made Billy Joe mad. Mad enough to make him ignore his instinct to stay down and play dead. Mad enough to make him get to his feet and square up to the man. He felt ridiculous. He didn't know how to fight. He didn't even know how to stand for a fight. He tried hunching up and making small, tight circles with his bunched fists, but he felt like he was in Tom Brown's school days or something. All his life he'd avoided fights, and now here he was picking his first one with a multi-decorated officer who specialised in unarmed combat and could probably kill him 8 different ways with each of his fingers. The officer raised his eyebrows in delight. "Your game, sonny," he glinted. "Splendiferous stuff. Needed something to get the old circulation going in the fistaroonies." Billy Joe actually saw the second blow. He didn't see it quite quickly enough to avoid it, but it was definitely an improvement, he felt, as it landed on his left ear, hard enough to rattle his brain against his skull like a caged budgerigar in an earthquake. Although he felt it was probably futile even to try, he launched a punch of his own. His vision wasn't exactly clear, but he aimed roughly in the centre of the vibrating image of the officer and was surprised when his knuckles made contact with flesh and bone. The officer drew his hand across his lip and looked oddly at the smear of blood, as if it weren't real, couldn't be happening. Billy Joe hit him again. The officer staggered back. He shook his head. His composure was gone. Anger sprang to his face, and snarling, he leapt at Billy Joe like a rabid wolf. Billy Joe twisted to one side, using the man's momentum against him, and helped him tidily over the bar, where he crashed spectacularly into a stack of bottles promoting Clearhead alcohol-free vodka. Billy Joe stood where he was, making his Tom Brown circles with his fists, until it became obvious that the officer wasn't going to get up again. Then Billy Joe grabbed the commander's jacket — he was astonished at how heavy the clattering medals were — and dumped it over the bar on his opponent's groaning body. "Maybe you should think about leaving now, sir." The officer grunted, staggered to his feet, and crunched over the broken glass and out of the bar without looking back. "You wanted a drink?" Billy Joe turned from the door. Mamie was smiling at him. At him. He shook his head. I don't think so." "On the house?" "No, thanks. I got a big flight exam in a couple of days. I should keep a clear head." "Well," she smiled again, "any time." "That's right kind." He flicked her a salute and turned to go. "Good luck with the test, Billy Joe." He almost froze in the door, but he managed to keep walking. She knew his name. Maybe he'd pluck up the courage to ask her out after all. Maybe he was less of a coward than he thought. He might even have the love spuds to make that low-level flight. He made a deal with himself. If he could do that, he could ask Mamie to the passing-out ball. He caught a glimpse of something glimmering in his right hand. He opened his palm. A St. Christopher medal. He must have grabbed it during the fight. He slipped it into his pocket and forgot about it. And that simple act would save quite a few lives. Admiral Peter Tranter had several names, most of which he knew and approved of, and a few he didn't know and certainly wouldn't have enjoyed. To his peers he was known as Bungo, though no one could really recall why. To the rank and file he was the Admiral, or the Old Man. To his valet, Kevin, he was himself, or, in the dark recesses of the R&R Club, after a bout of intense bad humour and several gimlets, Skunkfoot and Vinegar Draws. His mistress called him Bun Bun to his face. Behind his back, she called him Cheese. Right now, Vinegar Draws was doing his best to destroy the pile on his absurdly luxurious carpet in his ridiculously large office as he paced distractedly around his obscenely huge desk. He wasn't much of an admiral, a one-star job. He commanded the Space Corps Research and Development Program, which, despite its impressive title and its even more impressive budget, was generally regarded as the least demanding post in the Admiralty. Which was why, of course, he'd commandeered such an unfeasibly spacious office, ordered the disproportionately massive desk, and padded around in his legendarily stinky footwear on a carpet so thick that golf balls could, and did, get lost in it. It was his way of bestowing rank upon himself. He'd been a high flyer once, one of the youngest officers ever to achieve the command star. Then, inexplicably, the proud, purring engine of his career had futtered and stopped. He'd received a series of increasingly obvious sideways postings, until this one, the ultimate dead-end gig. There was no sideways from R&D, only up or out. He'd spent many long hours wondering about the why of it. He'd let it affect his work, his alcohol consumption, his personal hygiene, and worst of all, unless you were his valet, he'd let it affect his marriage. He'd almost resigned himself to a dull dramatic career where he never had to make a serious decision, contribute to policy planning, or achieve anything more significant than shagging his mistress from the multitudinous angles offered by his overly humongous and otherwise redundant desk, when Project Wildfire came along. Project Wildfire. Bun-Bun's ticket up and out of here. Project Wildfire was the code name for a prototype craft that, theoretically, could break the big one. Could break the speed limit of the universe. The light barrier. And it worked. Sort of. It promised new horizons for the human race, virtually instantaneous travel, the exploration of hitherto unexplorable star systems, and, most magnificent of all, another pip for Admiral Skunkfoot. And now, just days before the inaugural test flight, disaster. The test ship had returned. It had returned approximately 3 days before it set off. Not a terrible result if you chose to look at the upside. They now had 2 Wildfire ships for the price of 1. No small beer, considering the cost of the damn thing. And, as a rather pleasant side effect, they appeared to have devised some form of time travel. On the downside, however, there were clearly some flaws in the design, evidenced by the fact that the returning craft had been damaged beyond repair and its pilot charred dead and almost unidentifiable. Almost. So, this was Tranter's dilemma. This was why he paced with nervous fury around his prop from the Land of the Giants-sized desk. Did he call off the mission and risk his one great shot at personal advancement, or did he send his best and most respected pilot to a certain and unspeakable death? Of course, he'd already made the decision, though he couldn't acknowledge it. What he was really agonizing over was his justification for it. Surely, since the craft had already returned, he was duty-bound to send it off. In fact, did he really have a decision to make? Wasn't it inevitable? Causality and all that? Didn't he owe it to history to embark on this, the next stage of humankind's technological evolution? Didn't he really, really need that extra pip? It was a curious feeling, no question, staring at the blackened remnants of your own grinning skull. Hard not to shudder, though Ace fought off the impulse. He peered into the sightless sockets of his charred doppelganger, as if he expected some glimmer of recognition to flicker back at him from the dull, dead darkness. The technical boys were off checking and rechecking the DNA profile, but Commander Rimmer didn't need any chemical verification. It was his skull, all right, tautened into the familiar, obscene leer of a sudden heat death. There was something out of kilter here, something that shouldn't have been, something important. He called to the shower of sparks spattering from under the scorched nose cone. "Spanners, old love!" The spark spray stopped as the hot rasp of the oxyacetylene died. "Yeah?" "You say you've checked out the dash?" "A dozen times, what's left of it. And it all seems tick-tock." "I don't know. There's something about it that bugs me." The wheels on the trolley of his inspection board squealed against the hangar's rough tarmac as Lista slid out from under the craft and tugged up his welding mask. "Can't put me finger on it. You're not going, you know. Not unless we work out what went wrong." "Don't you start going soft on me, Spanners. You heard what the old man said. This match kicks off at 0600 in the AM, and I'm the centre forward." "I heard what he actually said was, it's up to you." That's the way a gentleman orders another gentleman on a suicide mission, Spanners. It's just good form. Good form? Good form? You're going to get barbecued up there, and you're talking like it's another topping adventure for the famous Five. Ace lowered his shades and hopped the 15 feet down from the cockpit and landed on the tarmac with the easy grace of a prepubescent Russian gymnast. Look, he took out a spotless handkerchief and wiped the sooty grime from his perfectly manicured fingers. Come what may, I'm going to this party, Spanners. It's a chance of a lifetime. Lista forked his hand through the thick wire brush of his regulation crop. I could stop you, you know. It'd take about 5 seconds to do a number on that engine that'd put the schedule back months. By God, the acoustics in here are dismal. Otherwise I might have heard a dear friend of mine suggesting a cut spatial events like sabotage. And that would never do now, would it? Listen to me. We all accept we're working on the cutting edge of technology here, and that means there's always going to be a little bit of a risk. But this is different. This isn't a little bit of a risk, Ace. That's you up there, looking like the last spare rib in a Chinese takeaway on a Saturday night. It's you. And from what those tech guys were saying, there's nothing we can do about it. It's already happened. It's inevitable. I don't believe they're right, Spanners. Nothing's inevitable. No matter how bleak things seem, there's always a way through. That belief, that hope, that's the very thing about us that defines our humanity. Now, what do you say we put a lid on the chinwagging, roll up our sleeves, and comb every inch of this damn crate until we can find out what went wrong and put it right? Lista cracked a warped grin and shrugged with his forehead. Your call, Ace. I'm just a grease monkey. Grease monkey? Ha! Ace mirrored his grin and slapped him heftily on the back. You're the genius who builds the damn things. I'm just the airhead who wiggles the joystick. Now, you managed to dig the black box out, you old tartlet? Lista handed him the recording device he'd torched out of the cone section. Ace jemmied open the seal with an easy twist of the crowbar, while Lista dragged over the portable monitor and plugged in the leads. There was, it seemed to Lista, an unnecessary pause before Ace pressed the play button. Then he realized what the hesitation was about. The poor sod was steeling himself to watch his own death. Look, Commander, he offered. Shouldn't we get this off to tech? They're pretty keen to... All in good time, Spanners. We've got to see this for ourselves. And his elegantly cuticled fingernail flicked play. At first, the screen displayed the computer readout of the standard pre-flight instrument checks. Lista scanned the data. Everything seemed discouragingly normal. Ace craned closer to the screen. Display's a bit dim, isn't it, old sausage? It might seem a bit less dim, Lista said, if you took off your smegging shades. Ace smiled apologetically. Like the preacher says, all is vanity. And he raised his sunglasses. Lista met his gaze. Commander Rimmer was sporting a black eye, a real Shiner-Rooney. Ace's expression said, don't ask, so Lista didn't. So it was true. He'd heard it, but he hadn't believed it. Commander Ace Rimmer had been given a tonking by Billy Joe Epstein. How was that possible? Ace tossed his head gently so the soft wave of his fringe hung over the offending feature, and they both turned their attention back to the screen. It was a short recording. The entire trip, launched to Blaze, had taken less than 15 minutes, and when it was over, they could still find no clue as to what had happened, or, unthinkably, what was destined to happen, and how they might go about preventing it. There was a clue, though. In fact, there were 3 clues, staring out at them from the screen, in every single frame of the recording. The contents of Lister's stomach lolloped queasily as he sipped at his 7th or 8th mug of disgusting coffee. He glanced at his watch without taking in the readout. It was night, it was dark. Over the quadrangle there was a warm woman asleep in his bed, with a dent in the mattress beside her, which he should have been occupying, and that was all he needed to know about the time. He tried to focus once again on the looped recording he'd made of the black box tape. The original was now being pored over by the overpaid research staff in their air-conditioned lab, with a plentiful supply of hot snacks and good fresh coffee to hand, while Lista shivered in the fume-laden yawn of Hangar 101, wondering whether to spend the last of his loose change on the oxymoronically named tasty noodle pot from the dispensing machine, or save it for a final mug of the foul coffee. It had been a while since he'd pulled a round-the-clock shift, but the symptoms of exhaustion were as familiar as an old friend. Right now, he was experiencing the big gloom phase, which always hit just before the dawn, when he began to feel resentful of regular people sleeping their sane sleep in their sensible beds with their normal daylight-hour jobs. Parts of his body started to become forgetful about how to perform the most basic operations. His mouth would neglect its swallowing duties, and he suddenly realized drool had caked on his chin. His buttocks wouldn't shift frequently enough in the chair, and sharp pains would shoot up his back. He comforted himself with the thought that the next phase couldn't be too far away, and that was the good part. He would suddenly be aware that daylight had sneaked up on him, and he'd get an adrenaline rush, thinking of being the first customer at the breakfast canteen, of the mounds of sizzling fresh bacon he'd deservedly consume, of watching the poor suckers who'd slept the night away dragging their way into a day of drudgery, while he wound his way home to the sweet caress of a sleep well-earned, with sunbeams slanting onto the bed through the slits in his curtains. He began to feel special, almost more than human, having gone on where lesser men would have surrendered. And best of all, he would feel incredibly horny. He jumped at the sudden loudness of the hangar door sliding metallically back, thus adding stale coffee to the unnameable melange of stains and odours on his overall crotch. He cursed mentally. For the past 5 years he'd been fighting a running battle against his own natural sloppiness and was still losing badly. The fluorescents buzzed and clicked on, filling the hangar with shocking white light. "Good God, Spanners! You still here, old fruitcake?" Lista tried to speak, but the coffee and tiredness had furred his throat, and what came out of his mouth sounded like the unintelligible ranting of a chronic drunk raging across the street at invisible demons. He coughed and tried again. "What time is it?" 4 a.m. Time for you to catch some Zeds, old chumburger." "The Whitecoats come up with anything?" "Zipperola, I'm afraid. They've run everything through the simulator upside down and back to front. Nada. They're tearing their hair out. You get anywhere?" Lista rolled his head back along his shoulders, cracking his neck satisfyingly. "There's got to be something here. It's just a matter of time." "Face it, Spanners. If you haven't found it, it's not there. You get some shut-eye. I'm going to need you around for the pre-flight check, so you're only going to fit in about 90 weeks anyway." Lista thought about protesting, but couldn't work up the energy. He sighed big time and pushed his casted chair away from the screen. "Half an hour," he said, as if it were a threat. "On the inspection trolley. You'd better wake me." "Good man." Heath leaned over and stopped the disc. In the sudden silence that whistled emptily through Lister's fatigue-sensitized ears, a thought struck him. Obvious. It was obvious. "Hang on," he yelled, and hopped back to the video console. He hit search play and then pause. There this is." Ace peered at the flickering still frame. Suddenly, his face ignited with delight and relief. "By God, Spanners, you've only gone and cracked it." There, it was staring at us all the time. We couldn't see for looking." Lista's enthusiasm might have been more welcome to Admiral Tranter if, A, it had been a slightly more civilized hour than 5 in the morning, B, the man's breath had smelled slightly less like hyena's flatulence, and C, in his ebullience, he'd remembered it was considered impolite in superior circles to spray the listener with stale coffee-coloured spittle when speaking. What, precisely, had been staring at them all the time? The Admiral leaned closer to the screen and peered at the frozen image of Commander Rimmer in the cockpit. "Sorry, I just can't—" Lista leaned forward and tapped the screen rapidly with the knuckle of his forefinger. "There!" He turned his wide-eyed grin towards the Admiral, barely millimetres from his face. "There!" Tranter tried to maintain his querulous smile as he was treated to a hot wave of Lista's pungent expiration. "All right, chaps. Let's not make this a guessing game." "It's there! There!" Lista jumped up and down, grinning, his eyebrows crescented at the very peak of their elevation. Tranter seriously considered taking his pistol out of his drawer and splattering what passed for this man's brains over his wall. He could have it framed and tell everyone it was a Jackson Pollock.
The date! Check out the date time readout.
The date?
3103.
He nodded enthusiastically, as if he were training a particularly stupid dog to sit up and beg.
31st of March, he translated. 3 days ago.
Tranter maintained his cool by reflecting that it would probably be an exceptionally small Jackson Pollock. Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't that precisely when we recovered the craft?
Yes.
Ace recognised the dangerous glint in Tranter's eye and cut in. You see, Admiral, if this were our Wildfire 1, if we'd launched it today, it had broken the time barrier and showed up 3 days ago, the flight recorder would have logged today's date. Tranter glanced over at Roddenberry, the white-coated technical coordinator, who was trying his best not to look shamefaced. The date? These boss were talking about cracking time travel and they hadn't checked the bloody date? Don't understand. If this isn't our ship, then whose the hell ship is it? Roddenberry cleared his throat. Well, in a way, we're not absolutely 110% certain, Admiral. But I saw the test results. You assured me, did you not, that the corpse in that craft was unquestionably that of Commander Rimmer? Tranter's eyes flitted guiltily at Ace, then carried on glaring at Roddenberry. Oh, yes, sir, I believe you said you were certain. 115% certain, as I recall. Indeed, that is also my recollection of, our conversation, Admiral. But there may be some... So would you like to explain to me how it is possible for him to be both dead and alive at the same time? Well, I believe Commander Rimmer's theory is about the best spin we can put on it. Commander Rimmer's theory? Well, I wouldn't take credit for its being my theory, Admiral. I just helped thrash it out with Spanners here and a couple of the tech boys. You see, I think our blind spot's been this breaking the time barrier business. You can understand everyone jumping to that conclusion, wanting it to be true. Damn it, I wanted it to be true myself. So it's... Have I got this straight? We haven't broken the time barrier, then? Not exactly, Admiral. Tranter slumped into his oversized chair. He actually felt his eyes begin to sting with disappointment. He'd already rather rashly ordered a dozen new, hideously expensive gold stars for his uniforms, twice as many as necessary, just in case the Admiralty saw fit to leapfrog him up to a triple pipper. Ace slipped one of his rare cheroots, his only vice unless you counted an extremely active, multi-partnered sex life as a vice, which Ace didn't. I believe we've cracked the reality barrier. The reality barrier? Tranter leaned forward. He had no idea what the reality barrier might be, but it sounded good. It sounded wonderfully promotional. Let's look at the facts. 1. This pilot, let's call him the Beta Rimmer. He took off on the test flight 3 days earlier than ours was scheduled. 2. The Beta Rimmer hasn't got one of these beauties. Ace raised his shades, exposing his black eye. Where did you get that, Commander? Tranter had heard a rumour, but it couldn't be true. Altercation with a door jam, Admiral. Ace lowered his sunglasses. Conclusion, the Beta Rimmer is not me. He's almost me, just not quite. Now, from here on in, it's speculation and prediction, but I think it's pretty solid. We believe the Beta Rimmer belongs to another reality, another dimension, if you like, coexisting with our own, but neither affecting the other, slightly out of phase. When the Beta ship hit the light barrier, it jumped out of its own dimension and into ours. So, you're saying that there are two realities, two universes running parallel with each other, with only minor differences in between, and the Wildfire drive can jump between them? Why only two, Admiral? Why just an alpha and a beta reality? Why not a delta and a gamma reality? Ace craned over Tranter's huge desk. Why not an infinite number of realities, coexisting simultaneously with each other? Tranter found himself wondering if this might be an appropriate juncture to avail himself of the secret supply he kept hidden in the water tank of his office bathroom. But the sun couldn't honestly be said to be over the yardarm quite yet. It was 5 a.m. The sun wasn't even over the bloody horizon. But why? Where would these realities come from, and what would they be doing there? Ace tugged on his cheroot. Here's the theory. Almost every day we all make decisions that affect the course of our lives. Should we take the job or hang in for something better? Should we run across the road or wait for the lights to change? Should we have the ham or the chicken? Now, what if every time we made a choice that affected the course of our life, in some other reality, the alternative were played out? Say, in the Alpha universe, we wait for the lights and cross safely, but in the Omega universe, we run across the road and get hit by a truck. Here we choose the ham and everything's okay. There we go for the chicken and contract salmonella. Tranter reflected. In another reality, then, some alternative Admiral Tranter at this point in the conversation would have made his excuses and headed for the bathroom. He turned the thought over in his mind before deciding he might as well make it this reality then. "Excuse me for a second, gentlemen." He rose and padded pensively through the thick carpet to his private lavatory and locked the door. He fished out the navy rum and sucked down its dark red warmth. What did all this mean? Obviously, it was intriguing, but he couldn't immediately envisage any practical application of the breakthrough. He couldn't imagine what use the military might make of it. In short, he couldn't be certain it would lead to career enhancement, gold star-wise. He screwed the cap back on the bottle with practised speed, liberally sprinkled his mouth with peppermint spray, and doused his chin with yet more aftershave, then replaced the water tank cover, flushed the toilet unnecessarily, and padded back into his office. "It's certainly a fascinating concept, Commander. Thing is, I can't quite see where it takes us." Ace looked up from the computer he was poring over with Roddenberry. "The point is, something went wrong with the beta ship. We think we now know what that something was. They jumped too close. Our mathematical models predict a kind of super friction between dimensions, something to do with incompatible tachyon densities. Don't quite follow it myself," Ace lied, having been personally responsible for discovering the super friction equation. "But basically, it boils down to this. The closer the reality, the tougher the friction. That's what scorched the crate. It came in too close to home. As best we can tell, if we increase the drive burn by a factor of 5 or 6, the super friction will be reduced to tolerable levels." Tranter's cheeks glowed red with alcohol burn as he tried to follow Ace's logic. That sly snifter had done him no good at all. He wished he'd been in the reality where Admiral Tranter had sagely resisted the temptation to drink before breakfast. "All well and good, Commander, but where does it get us, exactly? Anyone can see the applications of a drive that can travel through time. But what possible benefit can we deduce from a drive that can transverse realities? I mean, could we, for instance, aim for a dimension, say, where time travel has been perfected and bring the technology back?" Ace shook his head. "Afraid not, Admiral. As far as we can tell, dimension travel's something of a one-way street. Frankly, even if we thought we could find a way back, it would be impossible to establish for absolute certain whether or not the reality we returned to was the one we had left." Tranter poured himself a glass of water from his unusually large carafe. "So, the upshot is, Commander, you're expecting me to give a green light to this trip, knowing that the best we can hope to achieve from it," he sipped, "is flushing $30 billion pounds of hardware and the best pilot we've ever had straight down the Carsey." No doubt about it, he'd have to choke down his pride and send those bloody stars back as soon as they arrived. In fact, he might do well to check up on the second-hand value of the stars he was already wearing. Admiral, we're about 97% certain Wildfire 1 could fire off a tachyon message complete with digitalized video footage of the new universe, so long as he got it off inside, say, 15 seconds of arrival, while his trail back was still warm, as it were." "Oh, much better. A blurry shot of some stars that are probably identical to the ones we've already got, and a soundbite for the news at noon. That's a fabulous return for an outlay of $30 billion. That'll probably snag me the cover of Investor's Chronicle. I mean, at least the original moonshots from Earth gave the world Teflon." "Oh, come on, Bongo," Ace cooed. "You wouldn't stop a girl going to a big dance like this, would you? Who knows where the technology could lead? We've got to try it now we know it's there." Lista spoke up. He was beginning to hit the feel-good phase of fatigue. He was even starting to feel horny.
"Admiral, if the commander can shoot off that message, it means we'll know for sure the dimensions theory is sound. And if it's true, it's mind-blowing. It means that every possibility gets played out. Everyone gets a fair share of decent shots and bad breaks. It means, in the end, that there really is justice in the universe. Life means something. Admiral Tranter found himself wishing he was in another reality again. One of the realities where Lista hadn't chosen that moment to get an erection, or at least hadn't been too tired to notice it and cover the fact up. But no, he was stuck here in this reality where some solitary trooper in Tranter's head was playing the last post for his career, while he stared across his desk, eye to eye, with Lista's love pole, which was making an Action Man-sized tent out of the crotch of his unspeakable overalls. He directed his gaze at Ace. "I'm sorry, Commander. I'm going to have to refer this one upstairs."
You what?
A globule of stale coffee spittle landed on Tranter's desk.
You're going to pass the buck? The one chance you've had in God knows how many years to do something halfway worthwhile and you're turning it down.
Tranter, stunned, looked up into Lista's psychopathically wide eyes. He was convinced the oily little sod was going to clamber onto his desk on all fours and rip out his throat with bare teeth. "Easy now, laddie," Ace's calm voice cut through the tension. "The Admiral's right." But Lista was beyond restraint.
Wake up and smell your early morning dump vinegar drawers. They'll turn it down. They always do, because it's easier to say no. Those arsewipes wouldn't know a breakthrough if it raped the cattle and stole their wives. If that ship doesn't fly today, it'll never fly. They'll cobweb it in some hangar till nobody can remember what it was built for in the first place. Now is the time. Now or never.
Tranter's finger was hovering below the red security button concealed on the underside of his desk. He would have pressed it, but he was intrigued. Had this piece of scum really called him vinegar drawers? What did he mean by vinegar drawers? "Finished, boy?" Lista wasn't finished. Not quite.
Look at you. You sit there behind your enormous desk in your huge office because you think it makes you look big. Well, it doesn't. You know what? It makes you look small. Tiny man, tiny mind. Who knows what he'll find out there? Speg, he might even chance on some far-flung reality where the base commander isn't a petty little small-minded lush.
That did it. Tranter hit the button, and the two security guards were in the room and frog-marching Lista to the brig before he even had the chance to wish he'd had his mouth sewn up at birth. It wasn't, strictly speaking, sunlight. This far out in the solar system, the sun wasn't a big player, energy source-wise. What passed for sunlight on the ice world of Europa was the bright orange glow of the planet Jupiter, magnified through the reinforced plexiglass dome that held the Jovian satellite's artificial atmosphere. Still, Ace Rimmer had spent most of his life under horizons dominated by the majestic disk of the king of the planets, and for him this was the skyline of home. In all probability, he would never see it again. And he was afraid. He wasn't afraid of the mechanics of the trip. He was fairly certain his alterations to the drive would make the jag through the reality barrier safely enough. He was afraid of what he might find. True, he had more idea than most about his destination. He knew, for example, that wherever he wound up, it would be somewhere along his own destiny line. He would encounter another version of himself, another Rimmer, whose history would have diverged from his own at some point in their shared lives. Amplifying the magnitude of the wildfire leap by a factor of 5 would probably mean their paths had divided a significant while ago, possibly several years. And he was afraid of meeting himself. He was afraid this other Rimmer would be better than him somehow, a Rimmer who had made better choices, who hadn't taken the frivolous option of following his lust for excitement, a Rimmer who had contributed more to mankind, a Rimmer who would make him feel inadequate. He was saved from his maudlin mental meanderings by a woman's voice. "Commander! Commander Rimmer!" He looked up. Mamie Ferson was scuttering over the parade ground from the direction of the club, in heels not built for running. She reached him, breathless, then arched, hands on knees, to reoxygenate. "Commander," she panted. "Thank God, I heard you'd gone." She straightened, her face even more beautiful for the red glow of exertion. "Amy, are you all right?"
All right? All right? I'm perfect."
"Well, I'll be the judge of that, old love." He smiled and brushed a dark wisp of hair from her right eye. It flopped back immediately. "No, you're right, you are perfect." Mamie punched him playfully in the chest.
Didn't you hear? Billy Joe passed. He passed grade 1. He's got his gold wings.
Best news I've heard all year.
And it's all thanks to you, you brilliant old clever custard.
Me? I think it probably had rather more to do with young Billy's flying abilities, wouldn't you say?
You know what I mean. He'd never have had the confidence if...
Well, punch me in the hooter if I miss my mark, young lady. But I thought we'd agreed never to mention that little business, didn't we?
Well, I wouldn't. Not to anyone else. Not even to Billy Joe.
Especially not to Billy Joe. Not even when the pair of you are old and grey and sitting by some glowing fire surrounded by hordes of yowling grandchildren, all right?
Mamie's cheeks flushed even redder. You're getting a bit ahead of yourself, aren't you, Commander? He hasn't even asked me for a date.
Oh, but he will. He'll be looking for a special someone to take to his passing out ball, and unless I've seriously lost my touch, that someone will be young Mamie Ferson. Mamie dropped her head.
You think?
Either that, or I'll really have to box his ears and knock some sense into him.
She thumped him playfully again. Ace smiled. Why was a punch considered an acceptable witty riposte when administered by a young woman? If a man answered a playful remark in that way, Ace would have ranked him in terms of intellectual capacity and social skills alongside a TV weather presenter. When a woman did it, it just made his heart melt. She looked up, and something in his smile pained her. She looked away again. Commander, I've heard people talking around the camp. I mean, they don't understand what you were really doing for Billy Joe, and they're saying things. It makes it hard to keep it to myself.
Now, people will talk, Amy. That's the way of the world. Sticks and stones, etc., eh?
And that black eye, and Billy Joe will never even know he should be thanking you.
Listen to me, young lady. The way things turned out, this little Shinarooney was the best thing that could have happened to me. You'll never know how, but this little beauty saved my bacon. It's me who should be thanking Billy Joe.
Ace glanced at his watch. Time to spring spanners.
Look, really must fly now, Mamie.
Best of luck with the date. He kissed her tenderly on the cheek and strode off over the parade ground. Mamie shielded her eyes against the Jupiter glare, watching his sure-footed silhouette disappear into the early morning heat haze. When he'd gone, she sighed a smile and said, to no one in particular, "What a guy."